It was just after sunset in Palm Beach, Florida. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and from the outside, the Carr estate looked serene, perfect even. The mansion, with its arched French windows and manicured hedges, stood like a monument to wealth and quiet dignity. But inside, everything had already begun to unravel. On the evening of October 18th, 2023, paramedics were called to the estate by a panicked 911 caller. Male, young, breathless. "My partner, she's not breathing," he stammered. "She slipped in the tub. There's blood. Oh God, there's blood." When first responders arrived, they found 65-year-old Evelyn Carr lying lifeless in the marble bathtub of her ensuite. Her silver hair fanned across the water, her eyes wide open, fixed on nothing. The room smelled faintly of lavender and iron. Blood had stained the edges of the tub. And standing nearby, his hands trembling and soaked, was 27-year-old Miguel Reyes, the man she had once called her second chance at life. But nothing about the scene made sense. The bruises on Evelyn's wrists, the faint imprint of footprint on the bathroom mat that didn't match Miguel's, the shattered glass perfume bottle near the sink. Was it knocked over in panic or in a struggle? To the public, Evelyn had been a respected widow, a quiet patron of the arts, a woman of means and memory. Few knew that only months earlier, she had rewritten her entire life for Miguel, a man she had met under seemingly innocent circumstances, but who would ultimately inherit everything, or so he thought. What really happened that night? Was an accident born of passion, or a murder crafted from manipulation? As investigators began to peel back the layers of Evelyn's final months, a disturbing portrait emerged. One of obsession, of isolation, of a woman who gave up everything for love, and a man who may have loved nothing at all. And this is where the story truly begins. Evelyn Carr wasn't the kind of woman people expected to see on the front page of a murder investigation. At 65, she moved with grace and spoke in measured tones, the sort honed from decades of curated elegance and high society composure. A former art historian turned gallery owner, she had spent the last 20 years of her life building a reputation that matched her wealth, refined, quiet, and fiercely independent. Her gallery on Worth Avenue attracted collectors from across the country, and behind its curated walls, Evelyn curated more than just art. She curated a life of order, legacy, and solitude. She had been widowed 6 years earlier. Her husband, Charles Carr, a real estate magnate 20 years her senior, had left her not only a vast fortune but a world of cold silence. Evelyn mourned in her own way, through routine, through charity, through avoiding the echoing rooms of her estate as much as possible. She dined alone, traveled alone, even celebrated birthdays in the quiet company of her 2 adult children, both of whom had grown distant, consumed by their own lives and attention that had slowly replaced affection. Don't forget to subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next major crime stories. And then came Miguel. He arrived at her gallery on a rainy Thursday afternoon in April, looking for work. 27, lean, with eyes like polished amber and a voice dipped in syrupy charm, Miguel Reyes said he was an artist between studios, hungry for inspiration and a chance. Evelyn hired him to help clean and catalog pieces, a low-level assistant's job that somehow turned into late-night wine over inventory spreadsheets and whispered laughter among brushstrokes. At first, no one thought much of it. Evelyn had always been kind to young artists. But soon, whispers began to circulate. The woman who once lived in mourning now glowed with a warmth that hadn't been seen in years. She started wearing colors again, deep reds, ocean blues. Her social media, once dormant, lit up with candid snapshots. Sunset dinners on yachts, champagne glasses clinking over private gallery viewings. And always, somewhere in the frame, Miguel, what began as an eyebrow-raising companionship, quickly spiraled into something that shocked even those closest to her. Within 3 months, Miguel had moved into the Carr estate. By the end of summer, Evelyn had not only made him a business partner in a fledgling art venture, but changed her will, cutting out her children entirely and naming Miguel her sole beneficiary. Her friends were stunned. Her children were furious. Evelyn, for her part, stood firm. "I've lived long enough for everyone else," she reportedly told a confidant. This is for me. But behind the carefully manicured facade of her new life, something darker was growing, something few saw coming. Because while Evelyn believed she had rediscovered love, others began to wonder, had she simply become a target? And as we move deeper into the heart of their affair, the story twists from romance to obsession, and ultimately to ruin. The early days of Evelyn and Miguel's affair were cloaked in secrecy, though not the kind born of shame. Rather, the intoxicating kind that makes ordinary moments feel like stolen treasure. Miguel would arrive at the gallery long after closing, slipping through the back entrance with a bottle of wine or a sketch pad in hand. They spent hours behind locked doors, surrounded by half-hung canvases and dusty sculptures, talking about life, about art, about pain. Evelyn hadn't felt truly seen in years, and Miguel, with his attentive gaze and lyrical charm, knew exactly how to make her feel like the center of every canvas. What began in shadows quickly moved into the light. Within weeks, they were dining together at oceanfront restaurants, her diamond rings catching candlelight as she fed him bites of seared tuna. He walked her dog. He drove her car. He answered her phone when her children called. And sometimes he simply didn't answer at all. Evelyn, once so meticulous and careful, started abandoning her routines. She skipped gallery meetings. She canceled a charity fundraiser she'd hosted annually for over a decade. Her longtime assistant, Marla, noticed a change immediately. She wasn't herself anymore, Marla would later say in a statement. She was softer, but not in a good way. She was vulnerable. Miguel, meanwhile, made himself at home in more ways than one. He convinced Evelyn to turn the guest house into a personal art studio. Soon, luxury deliveries began arriving almost daily. Canvas shipments, imported oils, rare brushes, and then designer clothing, vintage watches, and custom leather luggage that had little to do with painting. Evelyn footed every bill without hesitation. In public, she brushed off concerns with breezy laughter. He's young. Let him enjoy himself, she'd tell skeptical friends. But behind closed doors, Miguel's grip on her life grew tighter. He began suggesting new friends weren't really loyal, that her children only called when they needed money, that even Marla was spying for someone. He was her confidant, her shield, her lover. And slowly, Evelyn began to cut ties, quietly one by one. She sold her husband's prized vintage car collection, allegedly to invest in Miguel's proposed art tech startup. Though no one could quite explain what the company actually did, her children, alarmed by the rapid financial changes, confronted her at a family brunch that ended with Evelyn storming out in tears. Miguel never attended another family function. Evelyn stopped being invited. Then came the will. Witnesses later revealed that Evelyn met with her estate attorney in late August. Her instructions were clear. Miguel Reyes was to inherit everything: real estate, bank accounts, her gallery, even her private collection of rare impressionist paintings. When asked why, she gave no justification beyond a single chilling sentence: "He's the only one who truly cares if I'm happy." By now, friends no longer whispered. They openly begged her to reconsider. But Evelyn had changed. She no longer listened. She no longer trusted anyone but the man who had painted himself into every corner of her life. Still, not everything was as perfect as she wanted to believe. The nights grew quieter. Miguel came home later. He took more trips to Miami, often alone, claiming business opportunities or studio collaborations. One night, Evelyn found lipstick on the collar of a shirt she hadn't bought for him. She didn't ask. She poured herself a drink instead. The seeds of doubt had been planted, but by then, they were tangled in too deep. She had dismantled her entire world for Miguel. To question him now would mean confronting a truth too devastating to bear. And so, she stayed silent, even as the shadows in her own home grew darker, even as her intuition, the same sharp instinct that once made her a formidable curator, whispered that something wasn't right. But love, when laced with desperation, can make the truth feel like betrayal. And Evelyn, for all her elegance and intellect, had gambled everything on a man whose portrait was starting to crack. As the affair deepened, the balance of power shifted, and what began as an intoxicating escape was fast becoming a cage. Autumn crept into Palm Beach like a whisper. cooling the humid evenings just enough for the sea breeze to carry a sharper bite. But inside Evelyn Carr's once harmonious estate, warmth had long since faded. What began as subtle discomfort had curdled into something more ominous, a kind of emotional rot that touched everything from casual glances to conversations that used to end in laughter, but now dissolved into strained silence. Miguel had become distant. Where he once greeted Evelyn with unfiltered affection, now he offered distracted nods, long silences, and the excuse of being lost in his work. The guest house that had once buzzed with energy grew quieter. The light would be on late into the night, but the canvas remained untouched in the mornings. Evelyn noticed it. She noticed everything. She also noticed his phone, which rarely left his hand anymore. The way he turned it over when she walked into the room. The sudden shift in his expression when a message came in. Once, she caught a name flash across the screen, Nina Rose, but when she asked, he laughed it off. She's just a buyer, Evie. Don't be paranoid. Paranoid. The word lingered in the air long after Miguel walked away. It gnawed at her, because the moment he said it, she realized she had become exactly that. Uncertain, uneasy, suspicious in her own home. Yet instead of confronting him directly, Evelyn turned inward. She began checking receipts. Noticed a hidden credit card she hadn't authorized. A $6,000 charge at a jewelry boutique in Miami. She didn't wear that brand. Evenings turned into solitary vigils. Evelyn sat at her bedroom window, staring out toward the guest house, waiting to see if Miguel would come in, or if he'd return at all. Some nights, he didn't. Others, he stumbled in smelling like expensive cologne and club smoke, muttering apologies before falling into bed fully clothed. Still, she said nothing. She loved him, and love, she reminded herself, is patient, but love, she was starting to learn, also has limits. Her children hadn't called in weeks. She couldn't blame them. She had pushed them away so completely, so viciously at times, under the belief that Miguel was her future. Now, she found herself isolated in a mansion that had once been a sanctuary, feeling more like a guest than the owner. Even the house itself seemed to sense the shift. The hallways felt longer, the light dimmer, the air colder. Then came the breaking point. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Evelyn decided to visit Miguel's studio unannounced. She hadn't done it in months, out of respect, or perhaps fear, of disturbing his process. But this time, something urged her forward. She crossed the garden barefoot, silk robe billowing in the breeze, and opened the studio door without knocking. What she found made her stomach drop. There, on the long farmhouse table in the center of the room, lay a spread of documents. A flight itinerary to Medellin, Colombia, dated 3 weeks from then. A rental agreement for an apartment, 1 bedroom, ocean view. No mention of her name. Tucked beside it, a glossy passport with Miguel's photo and a stack of cash bound in rubber bands. Next to it all sat a sketchbook. Evelyn flipped it open with trembling hands. Page after page featured portrait of a woman, young, vibrant, unfamiliar. A small signature in the corner of each. Nina. She didn't cry. Not then. She simply closed the book, stepped outside, and walked back across the garden. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath her feet and the pounding of her heart in her ears. From that day forward, everything shifted. Evelyn became watchful, calculated. She changed the locks on the wine cellar, installed a second security system, this one private, connected only to her phone. She met discreetly with her lawyer, under pretense of updating her trust. And late at night, alone in bed, she rehearsed conversations she never had the courage to start. Miguel noticed, of course. The tighter she pulled her world around her, the more irritable he became. Arguments flared over nothing. What used to be flirtation became venom. She accused him of lying. He accused her of control. He smashed a vase during one fight, left for 3 days during another. When he returned, it was with flowers and an apology she didn't believe. But the most chilling moment came in the middle of one of those nights. Evelyn awoke to find Miguel standing at the foot of her bed, silhouetted in the moonlight, just staring at her. He said nothing, just stood there, unmoving, until she whispered his name. Then he smiled and walked away. From that moment on, Evelyn began to sleep with her bedroom door locked. Yet, despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to ask him to leave. Part of her still clung to the man she thought she had known, the one who had made her feel alive again, the one who had told her she mattered. But deep down, Evelyn was beginning to accept the truth. She was no longer living with a man she loved. She was living with a man she feared. And soon, that fear would prove not only justified, but fatal. It was October 18th, a Wednesday, and the air carried an eerie stillness over Palm Beach, a silence that wrapped itself around Evelyn Carr's estate like a warning too faint to hear. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden where wilted roses bent under their own weight. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. The staff had left early. The art gallery was closed for renovation, and Miguel Reyes hadn't been seen since that morning. Evelyn spent most of the day alone. She walked the perimeter of her property 3 times, brewed a pot of tea she never drank, stood at her vanity brushing her silver hair for nearly an hour, as if preparing for something, though even she couldn't have said what. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized. Tired, unsure, cracked down the middle. By nightfall, she made a decision. She called her attorney and left a message. "It's Evelyn. I've changed my mind. Call me first thing tomorrow. We need to talk about the will." And then she waited. It was just past 9 p.m. when Miguel came home. Evelyn was in the bathroom, soaking in a lavender-scented bath, trying to quiet her thoughts. The water was hot enough to sting, but she didn't mind. She wanted to feel something, anything real. Through the closed door, she heard his footsteps. Slow, heavy, measured. He didn't call out to her, didn't ask where she was. The door creaked open slowly. Evelyn's heart pounded. She didn't move. She stared at the flickering candlelight dancing on the surface of the water, her breath shallow. Miguel entered without a word. He stood at the threshold for a long moment, just watching her. His eyes were dark, unreadable. In his right hand, he held a glass of wine, her favorite Merlot. In his left, a small towel. It seemed innocent enough, but there was a tightness in his jaw, a tension in the way he moved closer, each step deliberate. "I thought you might like this," he said quietly, handing her the glass. She hesitated, then took it with a trembling hand. "Thank you." He didn't sit, didn't touch her, just lingered nearby. "Did you go somewhere today?" she asked, testing him. Miguel's smile was thin. "No, just around. Thinking. You were gone all day. I needed space." She nodded, eyes never leaving his. "Me too." Something flickered in his expression. A twitch, a calculation. "You called someone today?" he said after a long pause. "Your lawyer?" Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The glass in her hand trembled slightly. "I saw the call log," he added, voice flat. "I just needed to," she began, but didn't finish. There was no point. Miguel knelt beside the tub now, resting his arms on the marble edge. His fingers grazed the water. "After everything I've done for you," he said softly, "you still don't trust me." There was no heat in his voice, no accusation, just cold disappointment. "I made a mistake," she whispered. A long silence followed. Outside, the wind rustled the hedges. A clock ticked faintly down the hall. Then, in one smooth motion, Miguel reached for the towel in his lap. Evelyn barely had time to scream. He lunged forward, pressing the thick cloth over her mouth and nose, pushing her beneath the waterline. Her legs thrashed wildly, kicking against the porcelain sides, splashing water over the edge. Candles toppled. Her wine glass shattered on the floor. Her fingers clawed at his wrists, then the air, then nothing. It took less than a minute. When he finally let go, Evelyn's body floated back to the surface, her eyes wide open, unblinking, her mouth frozen in a final gasp that would never come. The water was tinged red from a cut on her temple, where she had struck the faucet during the struggle. Before we proceed, kindly hit the subscribe button for more videos like this. Miguel stood over her, panting, soaked from the waist down. He wiped his hands on the towel, looked at her face one last time, and then calmly began staging the scene. He knocked over a perfume bottle near the sink, dropped the towel as though it had fallen in a panic, smashed the bathroom mirror slightly with a tap from the heel of his shoe to suggest a fall. And finally, he picked up the phone and dialed 911. His voice was frantic, but rehearsed. "My partner. She's not breathing. She slipped in the tub. There's blood. Oh God, there's blood." The operator tried to guide him through CPR, but Miguel ignored most of the instructions. He knew Evelyn was dead. He knew how it wouldn't come fast enough to change that. Paramedics arrived 9 minutes later. By then, Miguel was on the floor beside the tub, shaking, muttering to himself, soaked and shivering. The scene looked tragic, accidental, and above all, believable. But there were cracks, bruises that didn't align with a fall, evidence that suggested premeditation. And soon, investigators would begin to piece together a far more sinister truth. But for now, Miguel Reyes sat in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, feigning grief. He had won, or so he thought. The murder was done. But justice had only just begun to stir. The night Evelyn Carr's lifeless body was pulled from the bathtub, the initial impression was grim but plausible. An accidental slip, an unfortunate fall, the sort of tragic and whisper about in gated communities before being forgotten entirely. But Detective Mara Lindley wasn't so easily convinced. Lindley arrived at the Carr estate just after midnight. The house was quiet, the kind of unsettling calm that settles in the wake of something terrible. She stepped past paramedics and uniformed officers, her eyes scanning everything. The scattered towels, the shattered wine glass, the mirror cracked just enough to appear deliberate. And then there was Miguel. He sat in the kitchen, head in his hands, wrapped in a police-issued blanket, still damp from the waist down. His performance was meticulous. He stammered, choked on his words, painted himself as a distraught partner who had arrived too late to save the woman he loved. But there was something in his eyes, something cold and rehearsed that Lindley had seen before. She listened to his statement carefully. She slipped. She was drinking wine. I heard the crash and ran in. Tried to pull her out. Tried CPR. I called right away. It all sounded correct, but it felt wrong. Lindley walked through the scene again. Evelyn's body had already been removed, but the story the room told wasn't finished. A smear of blood on the faucet. A wine glass broken far from the tub. No wine on the floor. No towel in the water. These were details Miguel hadn't anticipated anyone would look for. But Lindley always looked. By sunrise, the house was sealed as a crime scene. Forensics was called back in, and Miguel, still wrapped in grief or what passed for it, was politely asked to provide a change of clothes and come down to the station. He didn't resist. In fact, he offered. "I want to help," he said. "Anything I can do." At the station, Lindley reviewed the autopsy findings. Preliminary results raised questions. The bruising on Evelyn's face and wrist didn't align with a slip and fall. The contusion suggested force, resistance. The cut on her temple was too clean, more consistent with blunt trauma than accidental impact. Toxicology came back next. No alcohol in Evelyn's system. Not a drop. But the wine glass by the tub had traces of her lipstick. Lindley ordered it tested for fingerprints. And something more. The wine itself was collected for toxicological screening. She then dug into Miguel's background. What she found began to stitch a darker narrative. A string of failed ventures. No steady income. A previous girlfriend who had filed a restraining order in Colombia. Quickly withdrawn, but the paperwork remained. And then came the money trail. Evelyn's accounts had been draining steadily over the past year. Funds redirected into shell companies and art sales that led nowhere. Her children had been cut out of her, 6 months prior. The new beneficiary? Miguel Reyes. Lindley brought in Evelyn's lawyer, who confirmed what she suspected. Evelyn had called just one day before her death, requesting changes to her will. She wanted to reinstate her children. She had said she no longer felt safe. It was motive, clear and chilling. But Lindley needed more. The real break came from Evelyn's private security system, the one Miguel didn't know existed. Tucked discreetly in the light fixture above the garden path was a motion-activated camera linked to Evelyn's personal cloud. Footage from the night of her death showed Miguel walking from the guest house to main home at 8:54 p.m., a full 15 minutes before his alleged crash response. Inside footage retrieved from Evelyn's private suite showed dim flickers. Miguel entering the bathroom, remaining there for nearly 6 minutes. No visible struggle. The angle missed the bathtub, but the audio picked up everything. The sound of water sloshing violently. A scream, gurgling, then silence. And after, his voice, low, cold, almost whispering, "You should have stayed quiet." It was enough. Detective Lindley made the arrest the following afternoon. Miguel didn't cry this time. He didn't scream or protest. He simply stood up, adjusted the cuffs of his press shirt, and said, "I want a lawyer." The story broke within hours. Headlines flooded the internet. Younger lover arrested in shocking Palm Beach murder. Millionaire widow killed by boyfriend oval change. Palm Beach tragedy. From affair to arrest. Evelyn's children, previously estranged, flew in for the arraignment. They sat in the courtroom, silent, as Miguel Reyes was denied bail. Detective Lindley watched them from the gallery, arms crossed, a quiet fury behind her eyes. She had seen men like Miguel before, calculating, charming, hollow. But now, at least, he was where he belonged. As the media storm swelled and public outrage grew, one thing became clear. Evelyn Carr's murder had not gone unnoticed. She wouldn't be remembered for the scandal of her affair or the whispers of her fortune, but for the fight she tried to reclaim at the end. The truth she nearly dragged into the light. And thanks to one relentless investigator, that light had finally exposed everything. But even as Miguel awaited trial, Lindley couldn't shake the feeling that this case was more than just murder. It was about betrayal, control, power masquerading as love, and the quiet, unseen ways in which people, especially women, are erased long before their bodies are. This time, at least, justice spoke loudly. The trial of Miguel Reyes began under the heavy scrutiny of both the law and the public eye. Courtroom 4B of the Palm Beach County Courthouse had never seen this much media attention. By the time jury selection concluded, it was standing room only for reporters, and every legal analyst on cable television had something to say. This wasn't just a murder trial. It was a drama that blurred the lines between love and manipulation, wealth and exploitation, a slow-burning nightmare that had ended in a bathtub. Miguel Reyes walked into the courtroom on the first day wearing a tailored charcoal suit, every inch the grieving partner rather than the man accused of cold-blooded murder. His expression was calm, practiced, unreadable. He sat silently beside his attorney, Jonathan Marks, a man known for getting guilty men off the hook. Their defense strategy was clear from the start. Paint Evelyn Carr as unstable, emotionally erratic, possibly suicidal. But the prosecution was ready. Assistant State Attorney Carla Mendoza opened with a single sentence that stunned the jury into silence. This wasn't a fall. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated killing, carried out by a man who had everything to lose the moment Evelyn Carr changed her mind. The prosecution's case unfolded like a slow, relentless tide. The jury heard Evelyn's voicemail to her attorney, the one in which her voice trembled as she said, "I need to change my will back. I made a mistake." It was time-stamped just 24 hours before her death. Then came the forensics. Dr. Alan Merrick, the lead medical examiner, explained that the injuries on Evelyn's body were inconsistent with a slip and fall. He pointed out defensive bruises on her arms and contusions around her neck that strongly suggested she was held down. The toxicology report revealed no alcohol in her system, contradicting Miguel's story about the wine. But it was the surveillance footage that hit hardest. The jury was shown grainy black and white footage from Evelyn's private hallway camera. The timestamp placed Miguel at her door long before his 911 call. Though the camera didn't capture the act, it recorded muffled audio, thrashing, gasping, and then silence. And a final whisper, "You should have stayed quiet." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Miguel's eyes remained fixed forward, motionless. His defense attorney objected to the audio's clarity, but it was allowed to remain. On the third day of trial, Evelyn's children took the stand. Her daughter, Evelyn Carr, spoke tearfully of their mother's slow descent into isolation. "She cut us off. She stopped taking our calls. And suddenly this man, this stranger, is living in her home, controlling her money, and she's scared. I know she was scared." Miguel's defense responded with vigor. They painted Evelyn as mentally unstable, hinting at depression, loneliness, even suicidal ideation. They submitted journal entries from months earlier, taken from Evelyn's private room, scribbles of doubt, of isolation. But under cross-examination, it became clear that those entries predated Miguel's arrival and had stopped once he became part of her life. Detective Mara Lindley took the stand with the quiet authority of someone who had seen the full picture. She laid out the timeline, the inconsistencies in Miguel's story, the camera footage, the suspicious banking activity, and Evelyn's call to her attorney. She spoke of Evelyn's visible fear in the days before her death. "Miguel Reyes had motive, means, and opportunity," she said. "And the moment Evelyn decided to cut him out of her future, he decided to erase her from his." Then came the defense's final move, putting Miguel on the stand. It was a gamble. His attorney advised against it. But Miguel, ever confident, wanted to charm the jury one last time. He spoke softly of his love for Evelyn, their whirlwind romance, her laughter, her loneliness. He claimed she had been drinking that night, that she had taken sleeping pills earlier, that when he heard the crash, he panicked. "I tried to save her," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed, but I loved her." For a moment, even some in the gallery felt the pull of his words. But Assistant Attorney Mendoza rose with the quiet force of storm. "If you loved her, Mr. Reyes, why did you lie about when you entered the room?" Miguel stuttered. "If you tried CPR, why were there no bruises on her chest?" He looked down. "If you loved her, why did you transfer nearly $300,000 to your personal accounts in the 48 hours after her death?" Miguel didn't answer. The silence echoed louder than any confession. In closing arguments, Mendoza didn't need theatrics. Evelyn Carr gave Miguel Reyes her love, her wealth, her trust. And when she tried to take it back, he made sure she could never speak again. The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. When the verdict came in, the room was still guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud. Miguel sat frozen as the sentence was read. Life without the possibility of parole. His mask didn't crack. Not then. Not even when Evelyn's daughter stood and whispered, "You didn't win." He was led away in cuffs, back into silence. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the memory of what unfolded would linger, not just in headlines, but in the collective memory of a town that had watched power, love, and greed collide in the most brutal way. Justice had been served, but the scars remained. In the months following Miguel Reyes' conviction, the echoes of Evelyn Carr's murder lingered like a cold wind through the marble halls of her now empty estate. The Carr residence, once a symbol of opulence, laughter, and whispered socialite gossip, stood still, its grand rooms cloaked in silence. Dust settled where music used to play. Her rose garden, once meticulously cared for, had begun to wilt, petals dropping like tears onto forgotten pathways. Palm Beach had moved on, at least on the surface. But for those closest to Evelyn, the tragedy carved itself into every moment. Her children, Elise and Daniel, were left not only with the loss of their mother, but with the bitter residue of regret. For months, they replayed every ignored phone call, every argument over Miguel, every moment when Evelyn had reached out and they had recoiled, convinced she was blind to her own peril. Now, in the stillness, Those moments haunted them. After the trial, Elise returned to the estate, not to live, but to retrieve the remnants of the woman her mother had been before the affair consumed her life. She wandered room to room, her fingers grazing velvet drapes and polished mahogany banisters, as if touching these objects could somehow bring Evelyn back. But all that remained were half-read books, perfume bottles with fading scent, and photographs that now seemed like scenes from a different life. A life stolen, not just by Miguel, but by a lie she had mistaken for love. Publicly, the case had transformed into a cautionary tale. Headlines shifted from the sensational to the reflective. The danger of love bombing. Read one article. Another question. How do we miss the signs? A Palm Beach widow's tragic end. True crime podcasts dissected the trial with a mix of outrage and fascination. YouTube channels flooded with theories, timelines, and psychological profiles. Yet amid the spectacle, Evelyn's humanity risked getting lost. Reduced to a victim, a headline, a warning. But Detective Mara Lindley never let that happen. Even after conviction, Lindley kept Evelyn's file on her desk. Not because the case was open, but because it wasn't over. Not for her. Evelyn's story had become a mirror, reflecting the quiet epidemic of women, especially older, isolated, wealthy women, preyed upon under the guise of affection. Lindley began working with local victim advocacy groups, sharing insights, helping other women spot red flags, hoping to prevent another Evelyn. She spoke once at a private gathering, low-key, away from cameras, where women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s sat in folding chairs in the community center, some in pearls, others in plain cardigans, all of them silent as Lindley recounted how Evelyn had slowly disappeared from her own life. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't naive, Lindley said. She was lonely, and someone saw that loneliness and turned it into a weapon. There was no dramatic applause, just nods, eyes cast down, quiet recognition. The Carr estate was eventually sold. Its legacy complicated, its grandeur diminished by the darkness it had housed. The new owners kept the name but changed the decor, stripping the rooms of Evelyn's warmth and charm. Her art was auctioned off, her jewelry locked away. Her story, however, remained in the walls for those who cared to remember. Miguel, meanwhile, faded into obscurity behind bars. Appeals were filed and swiftly denied. In prison, he was not the charismatic charmer he once was. Stripped of status and control, he existed in silence, ignored by those who once believed in his story. Time, as it does, eroded what little illusion remained. And yet, in a small courtroom file, in a dusty folder labeled Carr, Evelyn, homicide, her story lived on. It lived in the whispers of those who'd heard her scream through the surveillance footage, in the tightened grip of daughters clutching their mothers closer, in the eyes of women who now saw not just love, but a potential danger behind a smile too wide, a gesture too grand, a love too fast. Evelyn Carr's story ended in tragedy, but in its aftermath, it became a spark, one that forced a community and perhaps a culture to look closer, listen harder, and love with eyes wide open. As the final chapter of Evelyn Carr's tragic story closes, the reality of what transpired doesn't fade quickly. It lingers in the minds of those who knew her, in the faces of her children, and in the hearts of those who followed the case from the first chilling moment to the last word spoken in the courtroom. The courtroom, with its sterile walls and impartial legal proceedings, couldn't erase the emotional toll. It couldn't undo the pain caused by Miguel Reyes' calculated manipulation. Evelyn Carr had been a woman of wealth and grace, someone who had everything that money could buy, except for the one thing that often eludes even the richest, genuine love. And in the end, that longing for affection, for companionship, for reassurance had been her undoing. It wasn't just the affair with Miguel that had destroyed her. It was a vulnerability that comes with being a woman in her 60s, lonely, isolated, with a history that had gradually closed off the space for trust. When Miguel walked into her life, offering the promise of something she had never truly experienced, she believed in the illusion he created. She believed in a future with him. And it was that belief, that desperation for a second chance at love, that ultimately made her blind to the reality of his intentions. And so, we are left with the haunting image of a woman's life fading not in the calm, quiet way that old age sometimes brings, but through violence, deceit, and betrayal. A life taken not by accident, but by a calculated, cold-hearted plan to erase her from the equation entirely. Yet, even in the aftermath, Evelyn's legacy persists, not just in the material she left behind or the family she had, but in the lives she touched, in the lessons learned, in the way the community, those who had watched her deteriorate, who had seen her try to build something real, finally came to terms with the truth that love, while beautiful, can also be a weapon. Detective Lindley's efforts to bring justice to Evelyn's case didn't just stop at closing the file. Her case became a clarion call, a warning to others about the dangers of unchecked manipulation and how easily it can prey on the lonely and vulnerable. Lindley didn't just solve a murder. She opened a conversation, one about love, power, and the lengths some people will go for control. For Elise and Daniel, Evelyn's children, the fight wasn't just about legal justice. It was personal. It was about recovering the woman they had lost the grasp of a man they never fully understood. But even after the trial, the journey didn't end. The damage had been done, and healing was a far longer road. They had to learn to live without a mother who had, in the end, only ever wanted to be loved. The finality of the conviction, Miguel's life sentence, did not bring peace to everyone. For some, there was no closure. There was only an overwhelming sense of loss, a deep, hollow understanding that a part of Evelyn's story would never be fully written, because the most important part, the part of redemption, was stolen. The trial, the verdict, the media frenzy, these things pass. But the stories, the lives lost, the lessons learned, those stay with us. They shape our perception of love, of trust, and of how easily those can be weaponized by those with ill intent. They force us to look deeper, not just at the people we trust, but also at the signs we often choose to ignore in the pursuit of affection. And so, as you hear Evelyn's story, as you process the grief of her children and the coldness of her killer, think for a moment about the nature of love itself. Think about how sometimes the very thing that promises to heal can also be the thing that destroys. If you think love can make you blind, this story proves it can also make you vanish. Subscribe and share your thought for more shocking real-life crimes every week. Until next time, stay tuned.